Welcome to my shop. And these days during the pandemic, a lot of people are keeping to themselves. And to help pass the time away, I've started a small project. Earlier in the week, I got a sewing machine cabinet, and the individual that sold me the cabinet had mentioned, he said, the cabinet itself was in really good shape, but the tabletop needed some attention. And I thought I'd share with you some of my tips and techniques for getting a superior finish on some of my woodworking projects. One of the things is, if you can see around my shop, I don't have a dedicated area. I'm a hobbyist and I don't have a dedicated area for finishing, and as a result, you can see that there's a lot of sawdust. It's an active shop, and the challenge is how do I get a good quality finish? Now, what I did yesterday is I stripped everything down with a set of card scrapers, and it was really good. With the age of this piece, the finish came off literally. It had crystallized, so that part wasn't even worth filming. But this part, where I've started the process of putting on a polyurethane finish. Now, I've chosen a high gloss finish because of the fact that this is a piece of furniture that's going to see an awful lot of heavy use. And as a result, the higher the sheen, the better the protection. So that's one of the reasons why I've opted for a high gloss finish. Now, what you see in front of you is parts of the tabletop. Now, I disassembled everything due to the fact I wanted to get a fairly good quality finish, and having to go around a lot of these components where the hinges were would have inhibited that. So I stripped those off, I've set them aside. But now I'm at the point where I want to put my third coat of finish on. And before I do that, what I want to do is this technique that automotive refinishers will use. Is called rubbing out your finish. Now, it involves nothing more than getting a spray bottle with just ordinary tap water. Whoop. We want to mist the water and just regular 600 grit wet dry sandpaper. Now, the sandpaper I've been using, I've gotten a Canadian Tire. I find that it lasts a lot longer, and there's nothing more. And if my camera person can zoom in, what am I doing is that this finish is rough. What I mean by that is, at the point in time that I applied the finish, I had some small particles of dust under the finish. Now, what I've done is I've got the level of finish and the protection in the wood that I want, but what I don't want is to have that textile or that texture when I rub my hands on it. So by using a little bit of water, and I don't need a lot of water, but what am I doing is I'm lubricating the surface. And you can actually hear the sandpaper cutting. Now, some people might be apt to think that I'm removing the finish. No, I'm not removing the finish. All I'm doing is I'm eliminating any of these trapped dust particles that are in the finish, while leaving a fairly level level of protection or film on the wood. And that's what we're really doing, is I want to have a piece of furniture that's going to last for a long period of time. Done properly, nobody should be able to determine whether or not this project had been refinished. Now obviously I'm using a cotton towel. I actually have a good supply of these, and I am just literally going to dry the finish. Now I'm going to let this dry for a few minutes as I move on to my other pieces. Once that is done, what I will be doing is I'll be adding another coat. So just sit back, relax, and I'm going to finish the next pieces. Now, one of the questions people may ask while seeing me doing the edges of my cabinet is, why isn't he using steel wool? The simple answer for me is that steel wool is a friable material, and I don't want to have little bits and pieces of steel wool ending up embedded in my finish. And as a result, it's one of the things I stay away from. All of the polishing or rubbing out of the finish, whenever possible, I always will sand with the grain in order to eliminate any small scratch marks. One of the things that has taken me the longest time to master was understanding what were the processes. Finishing a piece of a woodworking project can give you an immense feeling of satisfaction and pride. But in reality, if you don't spend as much time on your finishing, then the beauty of your project won't show through. And so it has taken a bit of time. Now, one of the things I'm going to add is, do I sand in between each coat? Yes, I do. Now, this first time I was using 600 grit sandpaper. The next time I do this, I'm actually going to be moving up through the grits, meaning I'm going to be using a higher grit. Now, you could purchase wet dry sandpaper at your local hardware store in 600, 800, 1000 grit, and that's normally where I will stop. Now, each successive coat that I will put on, now you might be asking yourself, how many coats? Well, according to the directions from the manufacturer, you should put a minimum of 3 coats. I want to get a high gloss finish. Well, I'm halfway there. The first time, this is an older piece of furniture, and when I stripped it, that very first coat I applied, literally the wood absorbed it almost immediately. Within maybe 2 hours, the piece was dry. I yesterday put on a second coat. Now today, I'm going to be putting on a third coat, and this is where we're going to start to see that luster. Now, this is a time-consuming process because what I have to do is I've got to build up the coats so that I have the highest level of protection. Now, the highest level of protection means how many coats does this take? Typically, I've been known to go up to as high as 7 coats. Now, I'm not going to be putting 7 coats of finish on this particular piece, but I will be putting a minimum of 5 because of the fact that this is going to be a sewing machine, and what I'm looking at right now, this is the work surface, meaning that for the next several years, anytime that you're using the sewing machine, you're going to have material going across the surface, as well as your hands, the oils from your hands. So one of the things I'm trying to do is I'm trying to produce the highest level of protection possible for this piece of furniture that will last for many, many years to come. The nice thing about using polyurethane is if there's a blemish in the finish or a small scratch, all I would have to do is to wet sand that area and reapply another coat. It's that easy. It's one of the reasons that has really drawn me to using polyurethane over other finishes. As well, this is an oil-based finish. Why do I prefer the oil-based finish? I find that I get better leveling properties, as well as, it may not really translate well, but water-based finishes have UV inhibitors, meaning that this piece of wood is not going to develop any kind of a patina over the years. One of the things I'm not doing is I'm not refinishing the entire piece of furniture. And as such, I want to make sure that this tabletop that I am redoing matches with the original finish of the cabinet. And so that was a really important part of it in my decision as to using an oil-based finish as opposed to a water-based finish. I must confess, I find it a lot easier to work with oil-based finishes. I find that I get a lot more predictable results as opposed to water-based. Okay. And I'm just going to go follow me. Now, I have a selection of paintbrushes, and I normally, for this type of a project, I try and use natural bristles. And you'll notice, when you look at the size, pretty small brush. One of the reasons is I like to be able to do all the molding as well, and I find with a larger brush, I don't get the kind of control that I'm looking for. That being said, couple of tips and tricks. With using polyurethane, you never shake the finish. Instead, we stir. Now, we're lucky, we have here in the Garrison area, we've got a dollar store, so I can go in to our local dollar store and pick up these tongue depressors at a substantial value. Now I've stirred my finish, not shaken, and I always start from the furthest point and I work my way down the bench. And when you're using your brush, I don't load it so much as I just dab a little bit. And one of the most important things to remember when doing this type of finish is that you're always going to apply your product, in this case my polyurethane, with the grain of the wood. The finish can really do an awful lot to enhance the natural beauty of this wood. Now, this is walnut, American walnut, but it's not a solid piece of walnut. I was quite happy when I was looking at purchasing this piece of furniture from an individual, and one of the things I noticed was that the veneer, so this right now is not a solid piece of wood, it's actually plywood with a thin coating of veneer that's been glued to the top of it. And the veneer was in actually very good shape, meaning there was no ripples, there was no torn areas that were very, very noticeable. There was a couple of small blemishes that I was able to repair, but let's just say that my starting point was really good. Now, working in a continuous manner, and you'll notice I'm not putting too much product on the brush. The point is that you can't rush your finishing process. Going into it, you figure, well, maybe I need to put more material on. What will happen is that it'll take a lot longer for your finish to dry in between coats, and the likelihood that you're going to have trapped particles, because I'm not in what would be considered an ideal environment where I have a dedicated area with downdraft. I have a forced air furnace that heats my shop, and that creates a bit of a problem because I've got air moving around. So what I normally will do is I set the temperature and get the shop warm enough so that the furnace should not cycle too often during the day. Now, that being said, it's a nice day outside. Now, I'm just going to go ahead. Now, I always do my edges last. And again, one of the worst things you want to discover is that after you're done, that you actually put too much finish and then you had runs in the finish. Those are things that can set you back and will extend how much time you will spend on your project. So sometimes, and the old saying, less is more, well, that really resonates in this case. I don't want to put too much finish because I'm trying to avoid any runs in the finish. something that takes much more time and patience to correct. So best to avoid that situation altogether, you know. There. Now I'm not going to touch that, and I'm going to keep moving down the line. One of the things I've noticed as well, between sanding, between the coats, I've noticed that every application of finish afterwards goes on so much more smoothly. Just the polyurethane just seems to flow so much better after you've done some wet sanding in between your coats. There's nothing more rewarding than receiving a compliment on your work. Or that seeing that if you've done the job correctly the first time, that you'll never have to go back and repeat it under ideal circumstances. And always with the grain. And it's always worth the time to look at it from different angles to see if you've got any drips or an area that you have not covered. Okay, I'm going to start this area. It's the furthest or the closest to the camera. Makes my job so much easier. And again, I'm going with the grain. It's a short piece. There. Well, that's done. Now, I'm not going to be doing anything else in the shop for the remainder of the day, letting this dry because I don't want to create dust. Right now, I have not been doing anything in the shop. And that's an important thing about how I can get a better quality finish, is that if you are going to be doing finishing in your own home workshop, you shouldn't be doing any other work because you don't want to create dust. And so what I'm going to do is I've sealed up my can. Now it is important to note that this is my own personal observations, is that this was a new can when I started. If the can reaches about halfway, then you start running into problems where you're leaving too much open air in the can, and you could actually start to develop a skin on material. One of the things that I've done and I'm going to be doing in this project is, once I've got about halfway, to save myself some money, a can of finish like this can retail for about $25. And it's one of the things that's really discouraging is that when you, and I have unsuccessfully tried to decant the finish and put it into smaller containers, and wouldn't you know, it even dried up inside the container. Lee Valley's come out with this new product, and it's called a stop loss bag. The idea being, I can get that out. I should get it. Is that I can decant all the material that's in this can into this bag that can be sealed. But then what it is that I can actually get as much air out of it as possible, and then I can actually maintain the finish so that I don't have to throw out the can afterwards. You know, this is one of the problems, is this is almost the exact same finish, and look at it. Overnight, it actually started to form. Now, I don't do finishing on a daily basis. As a result, I end up having to throw out this material now. So that's one of the costs associated with doing work at home. So I'm going to be trying this, and I'll be keeping people updated as time goes on to see how well this product works with maintaining this my finish, so that I don't have to throw out half of a can. So until next time,